My name is James Zimmerman, and today we're going to be discussing some great books to read for this summer. Actually, we had one of the Minnesota Atheists members submitted a list of books to read for this summer, and I wanted him on, but he was unavailable. But the other person I invited on, Ryan Sutter, welcome Ryan.
Thanks, James.
Is also a member of Minnesota Atheists, and he has agreed to come and share his list with us. So we're going to be breaking those books down a little bit, talking about them, and seeing what might be great fun for reading this summer, since everybody has so much more time on their hands in the summer. So, again, welcome Ryan. Thanks glad you could make it.
Happy to be here.
So why don't we just start right in. The first book you have is by Alexander Waugh. Did I say that right?
I think so.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
And the book is titled God. And go ahead and just tell us why you recommend this one.
Okay, so I have a tendency to want to pick up any book that is got God in the title, and just at least peek at it. And on the cover, this one had a.
And that's why we're going to be covering God is Great after this one, right? Just joking.
Well, no, I think that's not in my pile.
Oh,
but,
okay.
But this one had a little blurb from Karen Armstrong on the cover that made me check it out. And what was really interesting about this book is what the author has done is he's created one of the funniest books that I've read in a long time, but without necessarily anything that would be obviously funny. I mean, I don't know how to describe it exactly.
Sounds British.
It's very British. It's very dry. It's very sarcastic.
Yeah.
But
okay.
what it is he's gone through and he's just done a remarkable job of analyzing and drawing out anecdotes and viewpoints on the Judeo-Christian God as represented in the Judeo-Christian scriptures, the Koran, Jewish midrash, and even non-canonical things like Dante's Inferno or things like that, where these are all different artists and writers' conceptions of what God is. But then he tends to tell these little stories in little vignettes, short little sections that are all numbered from according to, they start at 1 to whatever in each section that you happen to be in. And it's actually very well documented with primary sources too, because one of the things that I noticed when I first started reading this is there are a lot of stories I've never heard before. And that was really interesting. I mean, being really intimately familiar with the Bible, but not knowing some of the deeper mythology stories, some of the non-canonical things drawn out of, the infancy gospel of Thomas or things like that, things drawn from the Koran specifically. And the great part is there's this sort of tone of sarcasm, and he allows the stories to sort of hang themselves. Maybe an example would be good. I mean, he also quotes like Thomas Paine in here, or he's got, anything that sort of touches on this subject. But
I would imagine that you'd have to document it pretty well, because if somebody has never heard of the story or is unfamiliar with this story about God or a particular God, then they're probably not going to believe it, because there's probably a lot of absurdities.
That's
a
good point. There are a lot of absurdities, and I had not realized when I was picking out the ones I wanted to share with you that they restarted the numbering in each section. So give me a second here while I hunt down.
So is it put together in like a coherent story, or is each one separate, almost like a separate little story, you said?
No, there's no coherent story, but there are sections. Okay. The book starts with a brief introduction that describes kind of where he's coming from. He's not a believer at all. He is just more curious than anything. And he says, and this is kind of a short little paragraph that I think explains it well. He says, "What I have tried to show is that, seen from as many angles as possible, God is the most perplexing and yet most compelling figure in human history, revealed by a myriad of diverse sources to be mighty, jealous, rude, babyish, deluded, omniscient, vicious, ratty, benign, merciful, duplicitous, mysterious, wise, ignorant, grand, humorous, cruel, loud, racist, just, unjust, both mutable and immutable, visible and invisible, oafish, fragrant, anarchic, and so on and forth. And there is probably not an adjective in the dictionary that couldn't be made to fit somewhere.
And that seems like it could fit just the Old Testament alone.
Well, yeah, it could, but his scholarship is actually very impressive, and his sense of humor is obvious. The way he tells the stories, I found myself laughing a lot when I was reading this book.
So did you have a couple that you wanted to read, if you could find them?
Well, I did, and I seem to have misplaced them because of the section numbering. I was going to read 175, so where did it go? I apologize. I should have bookmarked it. I just thought the numbers were obvious enough for me that I would have found it. So if I can't, I could just pick something interesting. That's one of the fun things about this book, too, is you can read it non-sequentially. Almost everything that is in here is just self-contained.
Yeah, you can just pick it up wherever. Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a good thing about it being fit for summer reading is that you don't have to sit down and read a big chunk of it, just if you have 5 minutes.
Yes.
Maybe keep it on the back of the toilet.
Yeah, and actually it would be good reading for that. I just picked one here at random because it's very short.
Go ahead.
It says, "Fancy that. It took God 40 days to write the law on 2 tablets of stone using his finger, yet Enoch managed 366 books in only 30 days using a speed writing pen he had borrowed from God."
Nice.
And that uses a reference between 2nd Enoch, which is a non-canonical book, and of course Exodus 24:18, which is in the Bible. So what I think is kind of cool there is by cross-referencing all these sources and treating them equally, which they have been treated as equally throughout the course of history.
People,
They're not today, but if you went through time, there was always a time when somebody took these books seriously. It just points out all of the inconsistency and silliness.
Right. Yeah, I think if you start out as a non-believer and look at them, they really could come across as absurd.
Yeah.
More so than to a devout person who
I would think
sometimes
even
scratches their heads.
A devout person reading this would have their eyes opened a little bit.
You think
because,
so? Yeah.
Yeah, because they would see some stories they recognize, but they would also see them in a different light, and then they would encounter a lot of stories where they'd be going, "I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?" And they find out, well, that's in a holy book that somebody takes seriously. So that's that one.
And it's available at Amazon.com. I checked. So
I would believe it. Yeah,
you can get it.
It's very, very, very.
We can't say the same about all the books, but we'll get to that.
No,
but this one is easily available.
This one is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so then a little bit probably more time-consuming and deeper to get into is the Death of God trilogy you brought with you.
Yes.
By James Morrow. There's a name I know how to pronounce.
Yep, and there's 3 of them here.
Yep, they're by
so
Mariner
I'll
Books.
bring
Were
them
they
both up here.
each over 300 pages long, I think I saw when I looked it up earlier. They're also available at Amazon.com, so I was picking up some of the little tidbits about them.
In terms of length, yeah, that's probably about right. I found that each one was a pretty fast read. Morrow tells the story pretty well. If you like a Kurt Vonnegut or I don't know who else is similar. So kind of absurd realism. I guess the easiest way is to just describe it. If the viewers aren't familiar with, Towing Jehovah is the first one in the trilogy, and
unlike God, this one has to be read from start to finish, right, for it to make sense.
Yes, because this one's a novel.
Okay.
Yeah. So you would definitely not want to just flip.
Okay, so we have fiction this time.
It's humor, but it's intended to kind of illustrate. I think the main theme of the first book is kind of the contradictions between faith and reason in the world, and it starts with the event that God dies, and he falls into the ocean as a 2-mile-long corpse.
Okay.
And this upsets a lot of people, right? I mean, it upsets the believers. Angels go and tell the Vatican that God died, and we need you to take his corpse and do something with it because it's floating out in the ocean right now. And they don't want anybody to know God died, so they hire a oil tanker captain to go out to the corpse and tow it to the Arctic to hide it so that people don't know about it. Now, the atheists in the book, they get wind of this. And, of course, they're upset because God being dead proves that God was alive in the first place.
Sure, yeah.
So they want to go sink the whole thing because they don't want any evidence left around. So you have these two sides. One side is trying to hide the body for one reason, and the other side for the other reason. And it's pretty funny, and it's a pretty interesting read. But for my money, this one is just sort of setting the story.
Okay.
I think that for me, the most interesting one was the second book in the trilogy, which was Blameless and Abaddon. And the reason is that in the sequel, everybody knows God's dead. The corpse was actually purchased by the Baptists, and they used it to set up an amusement park in Florida.
Okay, sure, that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, Godland.
Mm-hmm. Makes perfect sense.
Well, like I said, it's absurd realism. It's all written like it's real, but it's pretty absurd. Right. I just saw this little quote on the back. It says, "An epic miniseries directed by Stanley Kubrick, scripted by Ambrose Bierce with special effects by Hieronymus Bosch, might begin to do justice to Blameless and Abaddon, but only if they get Jim Carrey to play St. Augustine." Okay. So it's a little weird. Mm-hmm. But they decide to put God on the corpse of God on trial for crimes against humanity. All of the wars and natural disasters and everybody who's ever died of a disease or whatever. Mm-hmm. So they decide to take the corpse and tow it to The Hague to an
international court
court of justice, exactly, and put God on trial. And in the process, they wind up, for some reason, taking a spelunking expedition into God's ear and into his brain, where the original Platonic ideals of everything that is in the Bible, all the stories, all these things, actually exist, and they're all still alive in his brain. So there's a Job, and there's an Adam and Eve, and there's all these characters. And they have this structure to the story. Most of the story takes place inside God's brain as they're going across the ocean, because they are attempting to deconstruct all of the different defenses that have ever been put up as answers for the problem of evil. So, describing that, the reason evil exists in the world, despite God being omniscient and omnipotent and all-loving and all that, there's all these different defenses that have been raised theologically over the years, and they all get treated independently in this book. And it's really, if you have any interest in sort of theological discussion and really why these different defenses for God and the problem of evil, why they fail, this book, the serious side of the book, the non-absurd side, actually illustrates and discusses all of those, all the well-known ones very, very well.
I think when we were talking about this earlier, you explained that book to me as just like the plot is just a framework in order to incorporate all these theological and philosophical points on the existence of evil or the existence of God, but to make it fun and interesting instead of just dryly reading like a book on philosophy.
Yeah, if you were reading, a theological treatise on the problem of evil, you're going to fall asleep really fast. But when, they're having a conversation with Job in the middle of God's brain while he's being towed across the ocean, and it's funny, and they can cover the same. So I really like that one.
So if we talk about if God is found guilty or not guilty, does that ruin the book?
I'd rather not just wreck the ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
But
no spoilers.
But the third piece, if the first book kind of discusses God, or kind of the plot is sort of about, the impact of God in human society, and the second one is about whether or not, God is responsible for evil in the world or not. The third one is more about why people believe in God in the first place, which is fear of death. This one gets pretty dark.
What's the title of that one?
It's called The Eternal Footman.
Okay.
and it gets pretty dark. It's God, his skull is basically in orbit around the planet, and everybody is aware God
As
is.
I can see from the cover.
Yeah, and that's not much of a giveaway there.
Yeah.
Everybody is aware God is dead.
So they're continually reminded if they can see it in orbit, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And because they're continually reminded, nobody has belief anymore, and it actually manifests in terms that people basically develop this second copy of themselves that is their own death, that is walking around, and there's this death, this sickness, and people are dying, and they're all trying to concoct something else to believe in. And it's a really strange story. It actually depressed me quite a bit when I first read it. It's not fun summer reading.
But you're talking about it because it's part of the trilogy.
It's part of the trilogy, so I'm including it. But it really does sort of get into the question of, as a work of art, it's attempting to get into the question of, well, we live in a time in which, in a lot of ways, God is dead and has been for a while in terms of people believing in them. When we can have a show like this, right? Once you've lost that belief, do you do to find value in life? How do you deal with the awareness of mortality, those kinds of things? And those are probably the bigger themes of the third volume. So
he almost attempts to answer even bigger questions with the third book than with the second one, which seems like a pretty daunting task.
I think so. And and when I first read these, I actually wrote the author to just say, thank you for writing these books. And he, interestingly enough, when we talked, he made it pretty clear that he wasn't trying to answer questions, just raise them and explore them. And he does treat every side fairly even-handedly. I don't know where he really stands, but it's a fascinating, interesting read. And
that's
I think
pretty even-handed. I mean, not to cut you off, but if you can say that after reading the whole trilogy, that you're still not sure where he himself stands on all these issues, then he must have been pretty even-handed in his discussion.
Clearly he's a free thinker and a skeptic. I don't think he is a believer in any
you
way.
don't know?
But I don't know.
He's not a Baptist?
It seems unlikely.
Okay.
It seems unlikely. But yeah, no, I think that, the books are all fairly different in character. Some of the characters are in all three books, but I don't think there's anything else in literature quite like it. I mean, it's a pretty interesting read.
When were they published? Do you recall?
I think I first ran across Towing Jehovah about 20 years ago.
Okay.
So
doesn't seem like a book that could have been written too long ago with any sort of success.
And I guess it wasn't quite that long ago. This came out in '94.
Okay.
And then the other two came out a little bit later. I had actually read another book by him called This Is the Way the World Ends that was pretty much explores Armageddon. James Morrow is a pretty interesting writer.
So it's the Death of God trilogy.
Yes.
And the best one of the three is the second one, Blameless and Abandoned.
Well, that's a subjective statement. I'm not going to go and say the best one, but it's the one that I found the most.
But I will say that of the three, that's the only one that I've actually read cover to cover. And you can read it by itself.
It's very self-contained.
Yeah, without having read book one. So if viewers want to just check out the one that you are proclaiming as the best, as a matter of fact here.
It was definitely one that I found. But I know a lot of people who have read Towing Jehovah. It's kind of a little bit of a cult classic among some people. So.
All right. And then the fifth book, I guess, is Doubt, a History you brought with you. It's by Jennifer Hecht. This one's 576 pages.
Yeah, this one's a little bit longer. Yeah. It's got a subtitle of The Great Doubters and Their Legacy of Innovation, from Socrates and Jesus to Thomas Jefferson and Emily Dickinson. Probably the easiest way to describe this book is that
well, it's nonfiction.
It is nonfiction.
Like the first book we discussed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and it is also not a pick it up and read any part non-sequential thing like the first book. This is a history written by a historian, but she's also a poet. She's a very good writer. It's not dry. It's engaging. It's it's what you would call a popular history, right? But what's very interesting is that she basically covers the history of disbelieving in whatever people are currently believing in at various times in history, starting from whatever happened to Zeus and Hera, 600 BC to 1 CE. Talks about Greek doubt. Who were the ones who were questioning,
In that time period.
In that time
obviously
period.
everyone doubts the existence of Zeus now. But
Obviously
right.
now,
But you
yes.
mean
But
back then. Okay.
what's so interesting is hearing about, the poet Xenophanes of Colophon, who began to criticize the actions of the Olympians because he thought these gods couldn't really exist. And, one of the points she makes in this book is that a lot of histories are written from the perspective of, here's a social movement, here's a religious movement, Zero, Christianity started here, or whatever. Doubt tends to be this counter thread that's going throughout history as well. It's this counterbalancing voice, and it's always there. Even in the early days of the first century in Christianity, she argues about that the Jesus story, the Christian story in the first place, is in many ways casting doubt on existing Jewish and Roman traditions.
Systems, yeah.
And she kind of shows doubt as the force for change and progress and moving forward, because it's not until somebody questions what everybody knows that you find out that that's not true. And but the one of the things that I found really enjoyable about this was when I was a religious believer, and I had felt that I belonged to a community and a history and a tradition, right? That this shows that even as a non-believer, you also belong to a history and a tradition, and a community that's just as long. It's been there as long as there have been believers. There's been non-believers. So,
and I think when we talked about this one earlier, you mentioned that the author discusses the importance of doubters in any given age.
Yes.
Could you speak on that for a minute, or did I just cover it?
No, I mean, many of the characters that she brings out even wind up being religious leaders of their own. What Buddha saw, 600 BC to CE, ancient doubt in Asia. But then you have things like sunspots and White House doubters, revolutions in the authority of reason, 1600 to 1800. She takes the age of reason back much, much further.
Yeah.
I thought one of the most interesting points, though, to get to your point about impact they had, is chapter 6 in here is called "The Medieval Doubt Loops the Loop," and what it is talking about how when the Dark Ages came. And Christianity had wiped out all of the previous Greek skepticism and doubt and philosophy, that it found its way down into the Islamic world, was preserved in those writings, and then came back basically made a loop around the Mediterranean and came back into Europe, and in a new form that nobody had ever heard of before, and it was all in Arabic. And so there's a lot of really interesting stuff there about how these people who held on to this tradition of doubt and this tradition of free thought and philosophy were able to actually kick off the Renaissance and the Age of Reason because they had held on to it, even though it had gone through translation and commentary and worked its way all around through the Middle East. So, I thought that's worth it alone for this book, in my opinion. It was a very, very interesting history.
So, Doubt by Jennifer Michael Heck. Despite being a history book, you're saying it's good summer reading.
Doubt a History. Yeah. Good summer reading. Yes.
All right. And then finally, we have exactly 5 minutes left. We have Lectures and Essays by William Kingdon Clifford, which is not available at Amazon.com.
No. Probably have a hard time getting a hold of William Kingdon Clifford's entire collection. But
then you told me how we could possibly read this then.
Yes. It is available on the internet. And in fact, not the whole collection. Most of his essays and lectures are interesting but not revolutionary. And
there was one essay in particular that you thought?
There's one in particular that can be found online. It's called The Ethics of Belief. And if you search on Google, infidels.org, I'm fairly certain in their library, their skeptics library there, they have this essay.
Okay.
The Ethics of Belief was an essay that he wrote in, I believe, 1877, and William Clifford was a...
1877?
1877,
okay.
Yes. Clifford was he died very young. He was a very brilliant thinker in the later half of the 19th century who, frankly, because he died young and because a lot of what he was doing was overshadowed by other people, he kind of slipped into the mists of obscurity in history, and nobody really remembers him. But this one thing that he wrote, The Ethics of Belief, which argues very strongly about the fact that belief by way of faith, without skepticism, rationalism, doubt, and investigation, is actually an immoral position. And he doesn't argue it, he argues in extremely strong, enjoyable to read, well-illustrated prose that if you're somebody like me who can enjoy reading, Thomas Paine's Age of Reason, where you're like, yeah, brother, speak it, then the things he's saying are really important.
So his main point in this essay is that you need doubt and skepticism in order to be moral?
Well, this is the one point that he makes that I wanted to share. It says, to sum up, it is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. If a man holding a belief which he was taught in childhood or persuaded of afterwards keeps down and pushes away any doubts which arise about it in his mind, purposely avoids the reading of books in the company of men that call in question or discuss it, and regards it impious those questions which cannot easily be asked without disturbing it, the life of that man is one long sin against mankind. Nice. I mean, it's that nice, fiery 19th century, Robert Ingersoll type,
long sentence.
Yeah, but also, I mean, kind of.
No, I know.
It's just direct, and I think the reason I wanted to bring this one up, this maybe isn't a good example of good, throw it in your summer reading list. But I whenever possible, want to kind of raise the profile of William Clifford here.
Well, but as a single essay, if people are busy in the summer, it's an easy thing.
Can always read the essay.
Short.
And I think it's worth reading, and I think it's worth people,
So correct me if I'm wrong. So the title of this essay again is The Ethics of Belief?
The Ethics of Belief.
Okay. And it's by William Kingdon. With an N at the end, Clifford.
Yes, and you sometimes just see it as W.K. Clifford.
W.K. Clifford.
Yeah.
Okay, as in the big red dog, Clifford.
I think that was named after him. That's because, the book's red.
Right,
so,
the book is red, too.
That was misinformation right there.
All right, well, we are almost out of time, so thank you, Ryan, for sharing.
Oh, you're welcome.
Your suggestions for summer reading. It was a good,
I don't think you can go wrong with this pile
mix
of books. Yeah, something for everyone, I hope.
All right, and thank you for watching. If you would like to contact us at the address and number you see on the screen, we'll be happy to contact you. If you're interested in us, we're interested in you, and we will send you a copy of our latest newsletter, the Minnesota Atheists. In fact, in the latest issue, there is Grant Steve's recommendations for summer readings, and Ryan has promised to put his suggestions in an issue coming up later this summer, so maybe you can catch that in July or August. So thank you again, Ryan.
You're welcome.
And thank you for watching.